Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here for the Princeton Public Library's presentation on oral histories with the Historical Society of Princeton. We are very pleased to be partnering with them. Before we get started, just a couple of quick announcements. We will leave the chat open briefly, but then we'll close it during the brunt of the event just so we can focus on the presentation. But in the meantime, if you have any questions, we encourage you to please put them in the Q&A box, which is directly below the screen. Please do ask questions as we go along, and we will address those as we go. The event is being recorded and will be available immediately following the presentation, so you'll be able to revisit it if you miss anything or need any additional clarification. I'm very pleased to bring up the Historical Society of Princeton's curator, Stephanie Schwartz, who is going to lead us in our presentation. Hello, Stephanie.
Hello. All right, ready to get started?
We're ready. I'll leave you the floor.
All right, let me get my screen up here. Hold on one second. Trying to get it to show me there we are. All right. Everyone see the presentation? All right, well, thank you for being here today to talk about, for our program, Research Your Roots, Capturing Your Family History. And we're going to be primarily talking about how to record family oral histories today. Today's talk will start with an introduction to the basics of oral history, some tips for having a successful oral history interview, how to prepare for an oral history interview, how to record an oral history interview, how to share your interview with others, and then how to preserve your interview for the future. Now, there's a whole variety of topics here, so we're going to pause for questions after each topic. And we're also definitely, when we get to the recording and preparing and sharing sections, we're going very deep into the weeds and the details about how to do this. We will not be offended if you know all this already and you decide that you want to do something else with your evening. That is perfectly fine. And also, these slides will be available after today's program as well. So that way, you don't worry about catching all the information. We're going to be covering lots of things, and that will all be available for you to look over after the fact.
Okay, hang on one sec. We lost Stephanie, but we will get her back up in just a moment. Thank you for your patience. I'm going to bring up Stephanie again. Again, bear with me. Just one.
I'm back.
You're back.
All right. Let's try this again. Okay. So, oral history. It involves an interviewer sitting down with the subject or a narrator who has some personal experience with or knowledge of a past event or period, and then you record that conversation somehow. A fun fact about oral history, it is both the oldest type of historical inquiry, predating the written word, and one of the most modern, because now we have tape recorders and all the 21st century digital technologies that we are going to go through today. So first, how do you have a successful oral history interview? Short, simple questions are always best. Avoid complicated words and abstract concepts. Ask open-ended questions that don't have a yes or no answer, as this will encourage interviewees to give longer, more specific answers. So say, what was your family like, instead of, did you have siblings? Especially at the beginning of your interview, try to ask more general questions that will help the interviewee open up. Ask them, what do they remember, and as opposed to very specific details. Don't start your interview with highly personal or sensitive questions. Allow the interviewee to become more relaxed before you dive into really hot topics. Avoid leading questions that push the interviewee in a certain direction. So ask, how did you feel when you bought your first house, as opposed to, you must have been proud when you bought your first house, right? Give your interviewee a chance to provide their own opinion. And don't just ask the questions on your list. Ask follow-up questions to clarify unclear details, points of confusion, and terms or words that you are not familiar with throughout the interview. However, once the interviewee begins talking, don't interrupt them. This breaks their concentration and disrupts the flow of the narrative. Wait until the interviewee has finished their thought before following up. So a good example here is, before we move on, I want to go back a second. When you said Alice, were you referring to Alice Smith, our family friend? That's another important point to make certain to clarify casual references that people might not know later on. Trust your instincts during your interview. When you hear something that moves you, ask more questions. Sometimes all you need to say is simply, tell me more, and that will work. Admit when you are confused or don't understand something, but don't disagree with the interviewee's opinions or feelings. So say, what were the reasons for your dropping out of school in 8th grade, as opposed to, why didn't you stay in school like everyone else? We have here a list of some sample questions to get you started. There are lots of resources online about different questions you could ask if you need to brainstorm. Some general questions include, when and where were you born? Where did you grow up? What was your childhood like? Where's your mom's family from? Where's your dad's family from? Have you ever been there? Who has been the most important person in your life? Can you tell me about him or her? What was the happiest moment in your life? The saddest? Describe your neighborhood, where it is, where it was, and what the community was like. What are you proudest of? Do you have any regrets? And what are your hopes for the future? These questions came from StoryCorps' Great Question Guide, which is a great example of an oral history project. But again, there are plenty out there, especially for doing family history. Now, good interviews combine detail and self-reflection. This means that you want to both they both need to be rich in the topics that they cover, but you also want them to be personal as well, and providing information that only the interviewee can provide. That is what makes oral history so special, is that it's a very, very personal type of reflection and storytelling. All right, that is our next topic. So we can take a moment here to pause if there are any questions about just the general things to consider when doing oral history.
I'm here to moderate.
Mm-hmm.
We'll give people a chance to type their question, but if you have any questions about the structure of the interview or what things you should be asking, feel free to pop those in here now, or if you think of it later, you can always ask it later, but we're just taking a moment to pause. All right,
All right.
we'll move on.
We can continue then with preparing for your oral history interview. So, first step is to do your research. Learn about your interview subject beforehand to know what's important and interesting to cover. Familiarize yourself with the basics. When were they born? Where did they live? What was their job, etc., because this will inform the questions that you will ask. Speak to other family members for additional background as well. It's okay to go into your interview knowing the answers to your questions, because your interviewee's answers will still provide personal details that only they have. Prepare your questions and topics ahead of time, but know that it's okay to change course. Use your research to draw up a general outline and some questions before the interview. This helps to get the conversation started and gives you something to turn back to if you have some dead air. But use this outline as a guide, not the rule. Still allow the conversation to flow freely through different topics. Now, most family interviews cover topics chronologically from birth to the present, but decide in doing your research whatever works best for you. Share your questions and topics with your interviewee ahead of time. It can take time to remember things. This helps your interviewee prepare and get their details straight, giving you the best possible interview. And your interviewee might also have ideas of things to cover. Talk to your interviewee beforehand about your plans for the interview and who will have access. Let your interviewee know whether you plan to share the entire recording with family, whether you intend to put it online, whether you intend to publish it, etc. They should know this before the interview takes place. Also, discuss what to do if painful or potentially humiliating information comes up during the interview, things that they would not want getting out. Consider assuring the interviewee that you will either erase anything that they don't want on record or keep the recording sealed for a certain number of years. You need to always remember that legally and ethically, the interviewee holds the right to their story and that you need their permission for any use you make of it. Thus, I would recommend having a signed agreement between you and the interviewee, especially if you plan to publish interview excerpts or you plan to put the interviews online. This agreement should state the consent of the interviewer and interviewee must be given before the recording is published in any form by any party. Ensure that both parties have understood how the recording will be used now and how it could and will be used in the future, and give both parties the opportunity to specify their wishes about these current and future uses. One great thing about this agreement, though I'm biased, is it makes it easier to donate the oral history to an archive at a later date, should you choose to do so. So we have here some excerpts from a joint statement that I adapted from the Oral History Society that's specifically for family research interviews. The interviewer's declaration here states that I, the interviewer, confirm that I recorded the interview and have discussed the current and potential uses of the recording with the interviewee. I understand that I own the recording copyright and the copyright of my contribution. I understand that the consent of all copyright holders within a recording must be given before the recording is published by any form or in any form by any party. I understand I undertake to store the recording and associated paperwork securely. I will ensure that a copy of this form will be stored alongside the oral history recording and any subsequent copies of the recording that are made. I hereby agree to abide by any access restrictions that are placed on this recording by either myself or the interviewee. And then for the interviewee, the language includes, I, the interviewee, confirm that I consented to take part in the recording and have discussed the current and potential uses of the recording with the interviewer. I understand that I own the copyright in my contribution. I understand that consent of all copyright holders within a recording must be given. Again, I hereby agree to abide to any access restrictions that are placed in the recording. And then they also include that I, the interviewee, hereby express any wishes to limit access to my contribution for a period of years, as we had discussed. So having this in writing, it's important to at least discuss all these points between an interviewer and interviewee before taking on an oral history project. You want both parties to understand the intents and uses and of the final product. Having this in writing really helps to make certain that all parties understand what is going on and that there is an agreement there. And then it continues to exist alongside the oral history. There are certainly just all you really would need is some form of this language signed by both parties, and that would be, and with dates and contact information. And that would really, really secure the project. I know it's a lot of legalese, but it's very important that everyone is on the same page. All right, next second, so we can pause, see if I think we have a question.
Yes, so the question is, do you recommend recording the interview, and should you offer a copy of the recording to the interviewee?
We will be getting into much detail. About recording interviews, but I think recording an interview is the easiest way to go. And there are all different ways that you can do that. It's much easier to record it by audio or video than to try and get down all the information by hand. I do think that offering a copy to the interviewee is an excellent gesture. I know we do that with our oral history program because it's a preservation of their story, and they want them, they have a copy of that. So I think that's always a good idea.
While we wait for any other questions to come in about the content of the interview and preparing for the interview, the other thing to bear in mind with legal issues and consent, and maybe Stephanie, you can expound on this, is when the interview talks about other people who are still living, especially if you're considering publishing the interview, when that language said all copyright holders, I imagine that's not only referring to the person who is speaking, but also the stories of the other people that they're talking about. Because of course, if they're saying something about someone else that other person might dispute, you're not necessarily immune from contestation of that story if you're publishing it or using it in any sort of way. We always remind people that oral histories are, this gets very legalese, but they're not private, and certainly if they're sharing information about people that might incriminate someone or anything like that, that's to be taken seriously, which is why it's really important to front load how the interview will be used, because then people can be mindful of the things that they're saying, particularly about other people.
Yeah, and I know in our oral history projects, which is a good practice, I think, is that you cover all of this before you do the interview, and then sign all the paperwork after the interview, if possible. So that way it is signed with the interviewee knowing what exactly they said, especially going back to that that point that they might say something that they don't want shared, or shared right away. And if they sign the paperwork beforehand, it becomes a lot harder to straighten that out.
This is why you commonly see in public archives that oral history interviews are sealed until the death of the person who was interviewed, and also the death of anyone who was directly mentioned in the interview.
And again, we understand that this is all, like, especially if you're sitting down to talk with your grandmother about her life's history, you don't really want to, it's difficult to get into the nitty gritty of who holds copyright. If you plan to preserve and use your oral history, it's very important for that to be included.
There's another question here. Should you use initials for everyone and not their whole name?
As a historian, I would maybe recommend against that. I feel like that would get very difficult to untangle further down the road to know what the initials stood for, and therefore it sort of makes the interview less valuable and much more difficult to use as a historical record. The stories themselves still contain as much a value as ever, but if you really want the interview to be used historically, that makes things rather complicated. But again, it's something, again, be clear about that with your interviewee and what everyone's comfortable with from the beginning.
The other thing that we always remind people when we do oral history interviews is that we're not necessarily protected by the same code of ethics as, say, journalists. So obviously in journalism, there's this very powerful shield that protects anonymous sources. And oral history is a little bit different. So we try really not to promise anonymity to oral history interviewees, because it would be very difficult for us to ensure that they remain anonymous unless, we can do our very best, but there's a possibility that information would be accessible. And so we really try not to promise that sources would be anonymous. And we would hope that if someone is sitting down to do an interview, that at the very least they're comfortable with their identity being revealed. But maybe we caution them against, if they're saying things about other people that might be questionable, that gets a little bit stickier. But certainly the identity of the interviewee is very difficult to keep secret. There's another question here. So would you have to get everyone's permission who is mentioned in the interview? Only if you're using it for certain purposes.
Yeah. It's obviously the most important permission is the person speaking. But it would be nice, especially if you're making the interview public or if you're donating it as a courtesy, to let everyone who is mentioned that you're in contact with know and give them the opportunity to speak.
All right. Please feel free to keep writing your questions in the chat and we can address them in the next question break.
And we're getting into the very, very technical side of things now. Moving on from the philosophical content side of things, we're going to talk about recording your interview. First question to consider, especially these days, is whether you want to record it in person or do it virtually. Both are options. If you're with other people, if you're currently in a social bubble, living with other people, you can certainly record an in-person conversation. But you can also use video and audio chat technology to have a conversation with someone that is not currently in the same building or home as you are. Another thing to consider is one interviewee or multiple interviewees. It really is best to record interviews with only one person at a time. This allows the interviewee to speak freely without input, and prevents confusion about who is speaking on the recording and people talking over each other. There are advantages, however, to interviewing multiple people as once. Individuals tend to remember more as a group than they would alone. And recording at gatherings allows us to uniquely capture family dynamics, and that are really only video and audio can capture. If you do choose to record a family gathering, it's best to identify the different speakers on the recording as soon as possible and to consider transcribing the interview, so that way you can identify in writing who is speaking when. Now, where to record? Find someplace quiet to conduct your interview. Sounds that you may not even notice at the time will be audible on the recording, everything. If possible, record inside where there's less ambient noise, but stay away from air conditioning units, telephones, ticking clocks, excitable pets, excitable kids, any sort of background noise if possible, because this will ensure a cleaner recording and help both you and the interviewee focus. And consider doing a test recording before you begin the official interview to test your equipment and check for any background noise. If talking in person, consider sitting at a table rather than the couch, because this provides a central surface for the recorder and then prevents people from slouching and then allows them to project better. All right, when to record. Good interviews usually run about 90 minutes to 2 hours. Shorter interviews might not provide enough detail, and longer interviews will exhaust both you and your interviewee. It's important to realize that you're going to need more than one interview to hear someone's life story, if that is your goal, and you're going to need to plan for at least 3 or 4 sessions to achieve that. When recording, start each interview by stating the following. The interviewer's first name, so your full name, the interviewee's first full name, your relationship with the interviewee, the date of the recording, and the location of the recording. So like, hi, my name is Stephanie Schwartz, and I'm here speaking to Alan Smith, my father, on November 17th at his house. If you pause the interview for an extended period of time, if you start a new audio file, or if you record over multiple sessions, it's important to restate that information at the beginning of each time. And it's a really good idea as well to note the end of the interview with a similar closing statement saying, this is the end of the interview, in some format, because that will really help people when listening to it at a later date. Now, what do you need to record your oral history? Some way to record your interview or two, and we will get to that. Extra batteries and/or your charging cord, because the last thing you want is your device dying in the middle of your interview. Any questions or topics that you prepared, and some sort of paper or a pen and pencil to take notes. Now, don't try to write down everything when conducting your interview, because that's why you're recording it, to have a record, to have that audio record. The pen and paper is really just for you to jot down anything you want to remember or anything that you want to follow up about. Now for your recording options. There's no need to go out and buy anything fancy. If you have it, that's great, but your phone or your computer will work perfectly fine. I would consider, however, having 2 devices recording at the same time, if possible, because this provides a backup in case one of the devices fails, like your computer crashes or your phone dies, or if you run out of space, and the last thing you want is to lose your interview. So recording options if you're looking for audio only. The first is to record on a mobile device. iOS devices, iPhone, iPad, have a voice memos app built in that you can use. Android devices, sometimes it comes with it, sometimes you have to download it. The Samsung voice recorder app, or there are plenty of other free recording apps that are available for you as well. You can also record via your computer. There's the Voice Memos app also on MacBooks, and it works very similarly to its phone counterpart. And Windows computers have a built-in voice recorder program. So to record using the Voice Memos app, you simply tap or click the button at the bottom of your screen to begin, and tap it again to stop your recording. And you can find it on your phone with the app symbol pictured there. Swiping up will expand the window and give you the option to pause or resume your recording. So there's a little bit more fluidity, more flexibility than the initial screen. And then once you stop the recording, your memo is saved automatically with your current location as the title. And you can simply tap on the title to rename the file. And we're going to get into file names later. If you click on the three dots, you can pull up additional menu options. And this gives you the options to share, ways to share your recording, and you can also edit your recording in the app. To record using the Samsung voice recorder app, very similarly, you simply tap or click the button at the bottom of your screen to begin. And there are corresponding buttons to stop and pause your recording. Now, when starting a voice recording, this app lets you choose between 3 different recording modes. For our purposes, the best options are standard and interview mode. Standard mode provides a simple interface, and it uses both microphones to create one recording, while the interview mode uses both the top and bottom microphones to record the interviewer and the interviewee. I've not used this app myself, so I think it would, which mode you choose would probably depend on the setup of where you're sitting, and where your interviewee is sitting. One cool feature I thought of that the Samsung voice recorder had was the bookmark button. And you could tap this to place a reminder on the recording, and this allows you to easily return to an important part of the recording, or it could be a good way to know a place that you maybe need to edit or cut something out because there was an interruption. When you stop your recording, a screen will pop up prompting you to save it. You can enter a name for your interview, choose a category from the drop-down menu, and then tap the save button. Once you've made and saved your first recording, a list option will appear at the top of the app, and you can click on that to access and play your recordings within the app. Again, you can click on, there's 3 dots in the upper right corner to pull up additional menu options. And from here, you can as well, like similarly to the Voice Memos app, you can share and edit your recordings. And it also lets you change your recording settings, and you can choose to block calls while recording, which I would definitely recommend doing. Now, for the computer versions, you have the Voice Memos app on a Mac, and it operates very similarly to the one on the Apple mobile devices. I think it just has, there's a few more specific buttons. There's a pause button and a done button. And then if you're a Windows user, there's the Windows voice recorder. This is the screen you will see the first time you open the app, and you click on the blue microphone icon to start recording. And then while you're recording, you press the blue stop button again to stop the recording, and there's a pause button underneath it if you just want to take a break. Once you press stop, you will see this window. This is also the landing page of the application once you have recordings stored in it. Your recordings are located in the middle pane in the bottom right. You can share, trim, delete, or rename your recordings right in the app. And if you want to start a new recording, you simply press the blue microphone again. Now, another option, especially when we're recording with people who are not in the same house as us, is to record audio and video. If you have an Apple device, you can record a FaceTime call if you want to be in conversation with someone you are not isolating with. There's also the photo booth application on Apple computers, which will allow you to record videos with in-person interviews using your computer's camera. And you can also use Zoom, the ever popular Zoom, to record a conversation from a computer if you're talking to someone you are not isolating with. So to use FaceTime, you can record an interview using the screen recording feature found on iPhones. You just simply swipe up from the bottom of your screen to access the control center, and then tap the record button, the red circle in the bottom right corner, bottom left corner, sorry, to begin. Tap it again to end your recording. And then all screen recordings are saved to the Photos app on your phone. Now, by default, voice recording is disabled. And if you want to record a FaceTime call with audio, you simply hold down the screen recorder button, the control center, and then you turn the microphone on by pressing that red button on the bottom. Since all this does is simply capture audio from your phone's microphone, you need to then increase the volume on your phones. That way it can pick everything up. And there's also a recommendation there too to make certain turn on Do Not Disturb when recording a FaceTime call, because otherwise all the notifications will pop up as well. Another option is to use, like we said, to use Photo Booth to record a video using your computer's camera. So it's only really good for in-person video interviews. You simply select the video camera icon at the bottom left of the app screen, and then click the record video button in the center to start the recording, and then click it again to stop the recording. And then Photo Booth will let you export files to any location on your computer to work with later. Now for Zoom, to record an interview using Zoom, you simply click the record button, which is on the control bar towards the right side. The host must record the meeting or grant the ability to record to a participant. So keep that in mind between you and your interviewee who's going to be doing the recording. Now, and then both the host and any participants will see a recording indicator in the top left corner of the screen. From this, the host can either pause or stop the recording up there, or use the bottom control bar where the record button was. There's now a pause and stop recording selection. It's good to know that Zoom recordings will save only once the host ends the meeting, not when you stop recording, though you can record multiple times within the same meeting. And the app will then, when it's saving the recordings, will ask you where you want to save the recordings on your computer. And then you can also update this location under the settings option, and that provides a variety of different options as well to customize your recording. All right, that was a lot of information. So we can pause there to see if anyone has any questions about that.
Hello again. We have a question about an older smartphone and screen recording, and someone does not see that button in the control center. One thing I will say is you have to turn it on. You have to turn on that feature in settings. So if you go to your settings and then go to control center,
yeah, there's a way.
You can customize. It's available in the control center.
Yeah,
Sorry,
there's a way. There's a way to turn that on. That's something that you might need to do, and I'm happy to provide any additional instructions about that should people need.
Any other questions about the technical aspects, different ways to record? Lots of options.
So many options. Basically, that's why you don't need to go out and buy a special recorder. We have all the options at our fingertips right now, and they all do a fine job. All right. So now that you've recorded your interview, we are going to talk about how to share your interview. First, you might want to consider editing your recording. This helps make the final product more polished. And through editing, you can remove moments of dead air, which are often at the beginning and end for recording, as well as get rid of any unrelated interruptions or conversations that occurred during the interview. Now, a lot of the recording options we discussed have editing capabilities directly in the app. Voice Memos, Samsung Voice Recorder, and Photo Booth all allow you to edit files directly in the app, and FaceTime recordings can be trimmed when they're saved to the Photos app in your phone. You can also edit recordings using Audacity, which is a free and open source editing software. One great thing about Audacity is you can use it to knit files together if you have more than one audio file. And when you're done editing in Audacity, it allows you to export the file in a variety of file types and qualities, including MP3 files and WAV files. We're going to talk more about file types later. If you recorded your interview on a mobile device, you're probably going to need to transfer the audio file to your computer in order to share it. Most of these files are going to be too large to share over email or text. You can do this by directly connecting your device to your computer via USB cable. If you're transferring between Apple devices, you can use AirDrop. I checked, AirDrop does not have a size limit for its files, but they did warn that larger files can take a lot longer to send and are more prone to network issues. Or you can upload the file to cloud storage like iCloud, Samsung Cloud, Dropbox, or Google Drive. And all of these can be connected to your phone and then accessed on your computer. Now, for file names, it's important to name your interview files using consistent and professional file naming practices. This just allows others to easily identify what the file is and who the interviewee was. What makes sense to you right now might not make sense in the future to you or anyone else accessing the file. The file format that I use and recommend is your interviewee's last name _ first name _ interview date. It's preferred not to include spaces in a file format and use underscores instead. And format the date numerically as year, month, date. Now for file types, it's best to save your audio recordings as both a WAV file and an MP3 file if possible. MP3 files are smaller in size and thus they're easier to share, while WAV files are uncompressed and are a higher quality. For video files, both MP4 files and MOV files are acceptable options. Now, most of the audio-only recording methods that we've recommended to create to create recordings, save MP4 or M4A files. So we often use VLC, which is a free open source multimedia player, to convert files to the desired format. And we have some steps about how to do that here. Or you can also open the files in Audacity and export them there as a different file format. Now, for sharing your files with others, you've gone through, you've created this great interview, and now you want to share it, which, and like I said, most of these are going to be too large to send over email. So you need to use cloud storage to share them. Popular options include Dropbox, Google Drive, OneDrive, iCloud, and WeTransfer. To share using Google Drive, you log into Google Drive with your Gmail account information. In the left pane on the Drive landing page, click the new with the plus sign. And a bunch of options will appear. You click File Upload. You select your interview file from your computer, and then it might take a few minutes for it to upload. Once your file has uploaded, scroll to find your file in your drive. Right-click on the tile with your file, and you will see a list of options, one of which is Share. This screen will then appear after you click Share, and you enter the email address of the person with whom you want to share the file, or you can copy a link to the file. Another option for file sharing is WeTransfer, which is great because you don't need a lot of times people might not have Dropbox or Google Drive or iCloud, and this is open to all. To use WeTransfer, you press the blue plus sign to select the file. You enter your email address and the recipient's email and press transfer, and it allows you to transfer up to 2 gigabytes at a time. WeTransfer will ask you to verify your email address as the sender of the file. So you'll just have to check your email and enter the code that you receive. And then the recipient of your file will receive an email like this from WeTransfer, and then they should click the link, and it will take them to this page where they can download the files directly to their computer by clicking download. And there's no reason to be alarmed by all the different ads in the background. WeTransfer is a free service, so this is just how it makes its money. All right, we can pause there and see if we have any questions about sharing your interview.
Yeah, so there was a question about whether or not the slides would be available to people after this presentation, especially these slides that have some very specific instructions. Sorry, I'm on the answered questions and not. The answer to that is yes, right, yes. Stephanie?
The answer to that is a most definite yes. We realize that we are bombarding you with a lot of technical information right now, and certainly you're not expected to memorize it all, and we will make it accessible to you after the fact.
And Stephanie we can also share Stephanie's contact information. So if you have specific questions as you work through that information, we're available to answer questions and help you. And certainly the library staff is also always available for general questions about things like Google Drive and all those sorts of platforms. So we'll work with the library to figure out the best way to get the PDF directly to the participants today. But if you want, the Crowdcast recording is available pretty quickly after this, and the slides will be visible in the Crowdcast recording, so you can always fast forward to find the slide that you want. But the PDF, we'll also try to make the PDF available in the best way possible to everyone as well. Any other questions before we move on? Okay.
All right. So now we're going to talk about preserving your interview, which is very important to consider. You spent all this time creating this historical record, and you want it to be available after the fact. Some of the best ways to preserve your interview are to save multiple copies in multiple locations. Have one on your computer, have one on an external hard drive, have one on another computer, have one in the cloud. Thus, if one file is corrupted in some way, you have a backup. It's also great to save the same interview in different file formats. I know the oral histories in our collection, we have 3 copies of each interview, a preservation copy, a mezzanine copy, and an access copy. And they're all different file formats. We have 2 WAV files of different quality, and then an MP3 file for sharing. So that allows you to use your interview in a variety of different ways. And if you have a preservation copy, you don't touch that one, and it just sits there to preserve the interview. It's also a good idea to consider transcribing the interview, because then this means that it exists in different formats, but beyond different file formats. You have then it both in writing, in paper form. You can save the transcription as a digital file as well, in addition to the audio files. Now, a little plug here. You can also donate the interview to an archive or a museum, and they will preserve it as well. If your interviewee is a Princeton native, you can consider contributing your interview to Voices of Princeton, which is a collaborative oral history project between us, the Historical Society of Princeton, the Princeton Public Library, the Arts Council of Princeton, and the Witherspoon Jackson Historical and Cultural Society. And this project collects, shares, and archives stories and memories of Princetonians. If your story is not Princeton related or not about someone from Princeton, think about what historical societies, libraries, or museums might be interested in your interviewee's story. Think like what locations are mentioned, what institutions are featured, and then reach out to those places and see if they would be interested in acquiring the interview. Now, and a lot of times, each of these oral history projects have their own consent and copyright requirements and paperwork. So this is, if you are interested in possibly donating the interview to an archive or museum at some point, it's especially important to get that agreement between the interviewer and the interviewee to have that with your interview, because any oral history project would want that consent information. All right, I believe that is the end. So we can take any final questions that you might have about preserving oral histories or about any of the topics that we have discussed tonight.
And I see there's a nice link to the Voices of Princeton project at the bottom of the screen. Thank you. Right now, if you're interested or if you're thinking about narrowing the topic of your conversation, the Voices of Princeton project is crowdsourcing, collecting oral histories about COVID-19 experiences. So if around the Thanksgiving virtual table or the holiday virtual table, you want to record some experiences from this year, there's some detailed instructions on the Voices of Princeton website about how to do that and what specifically we'll be collecting. Any other final questions?
And again, if you think of any questions later, we'll definitely send along my contact information, and my email address is stephanie@princetonhistory.org, and we'll get that to you virtually as well. And I'm happy to answer questions vague and specific.
Thank Thank you both so much. Izzy, I didn't officially introduce you, but Executive Director of the Historical Society of Princeton, thank you so much for moderating, and Stephanie for this excellent presentation. So much detail and so many great tips for everyone. We hope that you will use this information. Again, please feel free to view the recording after the fact, and we will be in touch with the hard copy files or the PDF, so you can make your own hard copies if you'd like them. So that you can go forth and record all of these wonderful stories, preserving your history for living generations and for the future. So please do continue to check out library programming as well as Historical Society of Princeton programming. We are princetonlibrary.org. They are princetonhistory.org. And we hope that you will continue to join us here on Crowdcast and for many of our future events. Thank you all very much. Ladies, thank you again for your presentation. It's wonderful.
Oh, Nora, there's a question in the chat. Do you need our email address? I presume that's regarding how we'll get the PDFs to everyone.
Yes, so we do not. We can email you directly through Crowdcast through your registration, so no need to provide us with any additional information. We will reach out to you that way. You, again, are always free to contact the library directly or the Historical Society directly with other specific questions, but we will be in touch through Crowdcast itself. Thank you. All right. Thank you all again for your participation and for your questions.
Yeah.
And for your time. Please do also, we put a question at the top of the chat. We are looking to provide additional programming on family history and genealogy. So if there are topics that you are particularly interested in, please drop those in the chat or let us know at the library. Thanks all. Have a good night.